The evening unfolded just like many others in recent months. William sat slumped on the sofa, his posture radiating exhaustion or perhaps resignation, his dull, unfocused eyes fixated on the muted glow of the television, its flickering light faintly illuminating the dim room. A glass of whiskey sat untouched on the coffee table, its amber liquid slowly warming. William barely noticed it. His restless thoughts wandered from the soothing crackle of the fireplace to the closed curtains, and finally to his phone lying idle nearby. He made no move to pick it up. He didn't want to. Victoria's behavior had been shifting subtly over the past few weeks. Initially, William dismissed it, attributing her actions to the inevitable strain of daily life. He convinced himself it was the wear and tear that creeps into every long-term relationship. But the changes were persistent. Late nights, secretive glances at her phone, and the fleeting, private smiles when it buzzed with messages. These small shifts built into something undeniable, something William could no longer ignore. Tonight, the atmosphere was heavier than usual, laden with a palpable tension that hung between them like an unseen fog. Earlier, Victoria mentioned plans to meet old colleagues. Her tone was casual, as if it was nothing significant. Yet, William sensed something off, the hesitation in her voice, the way her hand lingered on the door handle, as though mustering the courage to deceive. Lately, Victoria had begun speaking about Charles, a new co-worker, with increasing frequency. She described him as charismatic and admired by everyone, but her tone when mentioning him struck a nerve in William. There was an unmistakable note of admiration, a sparkle in her eyes that contrasted with her other conversations. At first, William brushed off his suspicions. He believed their bond, built on over a decade of trust, was unshakable. But as the days passed, her vivid descriptions of Charles's achievements and her enthusiasm whenever she spoke of him planted a seed of doubt. That doubt took root and grew. The tipping point came last week when Victoria wore an old dress William had gifted her during their early days of dating. The sight of her in it stirred memories of their happier times, yet something felt amiss. It seemed like she was dressing for someone else. Someone new. Someone like Charles. As suspicion solidified into certainty, William found himself waiting. Hours later, the front door creaked open. Victoria entered quietly, removing her coat with deliberate care. Her eyes briefly met William's, and the air between them grew heavier, thick with unspoken words. A faint, unfamiliar fragrance, a new perfume, wafted toward him. "Still up?" she asked lightly, her voice strained. "I'm fine," William replied evenly, though his thoughts were turbulent. He watched her hang her coat, noting her forced smile and the tension in her movements. "How was it?" he asked casually, his tone masking the storm brewing inside. "It was nice," she answered quickly, her gaze darting to her phone. "Charles was there. We all had a great time." Her words felt rehearsed, too precise. Something in the way she said Charles's name made William's stomach churn. "Charles again," he said lightly. "Why don't you ever bring him over? He sounds like such a great guy." Victoria hesitated, her eyes flickering nervously. "He's busy," she replied with a shrug, but William saw through the lie. He placed his glass down with deliberate force, his voice tightening. "Strange. You talk about him constantly, yet he's too busy to meet me." Victoria's expression hardened. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped. "Charles is just a friend. You're blowing this out of proportion." Her defensiveness only confirmed William's fears. Before he could respond, she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. "I'll be back later," she said curtly. "Don't wait up." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving William frozen. Slowly, he walked to the window and peered into the night. Moments later, he saw her slip into a waiting car. Her laughter echoed faintly on the breeze. Behind the wheel sat Charles, his face illuminated by the dim streetlight. As the car disappeared into the darkness, betrayal washed over William like a cold wave. Yet beneath the pain, something darker stirred. When dawn broke, Victoria returned, slipping into the house as if nothing had changed. But William was waiting. His face was pale, unreadable, his gaze unyielding. "What happened last night?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "It was just a night out with friends," she murmured, avoiding his piercing stare. "No," William replied, stepping closer. "You left with Charles. You've been hiding something." "William, stop," she snapped. "It's not what you think." He laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the tense air. "Not what I think. Then explain it to me, Victoria. What am I missing?" Her protest faltered, her words stumbling. Silence enveloped them, louder than any argument could be. "You've made your choice," William declared quietly. "Now I'll make mine." Victoria's face fell, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "What are you planning?" she whispered, her voice trembling. A dark smile curled on William's lips as he turned away. "I think you already know." He strode to his study, his mind whirring. As he sifted through documents and financial files, a grim determination settled over him. Holding the papers in his hand, he muttered, "You want to play games, Victoria? Let's see who wins." He murmured under his breath, "Let's see how far you're willing to go." Meanwhile, Victoria's phone vibrated, jolting her back to reality. Hesitating, she picked it up, her heart sinking as her eyes scanned the message from Charles. It was brief but incriminating. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Everything's going as planned. I'll pick you up after." Her pulse raced, panic overtaking her as she processed the message's implications. But it was too late. William had already begun his carefully laid plan, and her options were vanishing rapidly. The words William spoke next sent a sharp, almost electric shock through Victoria. Her body tensed as the statement lingered ominously in the air. She glanced at him, her gaze settling on the figure seated at the desk, hunched in focused determination. His back was to her, a rare occurrence in recent months, and that seemingly insignificant act signaled a seismic shift. The gravity of her actions pressed down on her with suffocating intensity. Her breathing grew shallow as the walls seemed to close in. Yet William remained unmoved, immersed in his work, his movements deliberate and precise. He was a man of calculated actions, his every step purposeful, a stark contrast to the chaos she had sown. Frozen in place, Victoria could no longer ignore the consequences of her choices, which now stood before her with crushing clarity. William's fingers danced over the keyboard with practiced ease, each keystroke finalizing his meticulously devised strategy. His life, once built on control and order, had been disrupted by her betrayal. Now he was reclaiming it on his terms. The financial dealings, the culmination of his retaliation, were completed in moments. Victoria had always entrusted him with their finances, confident in his skill and responsibility. Now, that trust was being weaponized, not for reconciliation but for devastating retribution. When William finally turned to face her, he found her exactly where he'd left her, motionless, clutching her phone with white-knuckled tension. Her face was ashen, her lips pressed tightly together, as though holding back the words that might somehow salvage the remnants of their fractured relationship. But William's resolve was ironclad. His voice, calm and detached, cut through the silence like a blade. "Are you thinking of leaving?" His words carried a tone of disinterest, yet their meaning was heavy and undeniable. Victoria opened her mouth to answer, but her voice failed her. She wasn't prepared for the chilling indifference in his tone. "William, please," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I never meant for things to go this far." His eyes hardened, their steely gaze unwavering. "Apologies won't change anything now, Victoria. The damage is done," he said, pausing briefly to let the weight of his words sink in before delivering the final blow. "But don't worry. You will face the consequences. Let's see how Charles handles it when everything he's built comes crashing down." Her breath hitched as his words struck her like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. William leaned closer, his expression cold and unrelenting. I know everything, he stated. The affair, the deceit, the betrayal. But your actions didn't just hurt me, they left you exposed. Now, I'm taking it all away. He listed her losses with chilling precision, his voice a measured monotone. The house, the car, the money you spent on your little escapades with Charles, it's all gone. Victoria staggered back, the ground beneath her metaphorically crumbling. What did you do? She whispered, terror gripping her. Standing tall, William's words landed with thunderous finality. I made sure you'll remember this forever. Your accounts are drained. Your credit cards are maxed out. The house is in foreclosure. And Charles? He'll be getting a call from HR about his policy violations tomorrow. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the couch, her mind spinning. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as the reality of her ruined life set in. Everything she had depended on was gone. William, impassive, watched her break down without a hint of sympathy. He had braced himself for this moment, the moment her betrayal demanded its toll. He had given her every chance to make things right, but now it was too late. Leave, he said, his voice sharp and commanding. I'm done. Tears welled in Victoria's eyes, but she couldn't move. She was paralyzed, crushed by the weight of his final words. She had nowhere to go, no plan, and no future. Later that night, the oppressive silence of the empty house was interrupted by the buzzing of her phone. Trembling, she checked the notification. Her heart sank. Her bank balance was zero. Her savings were gone. The mortgage was overdue. Utilities had been cut off. In the days that followed, her life unraveled. Her car was repossessed. The home she had cherished was no longer hers. Each moment stripped away another piece of the life she once took for granted. Desperate, she reached out to Charles, but her calls went unanswered. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be caught in the aftermath of her destruction. Victoria was alone, left to confront the wreckage of her choices. Meanwhile, William had vanished, rebuilding a life free from their broken marriage. He had severed ties with the past, leaving her to grapple with the consequences of her betrayal. Victoria, once confident and secure, was left with nothing but regret. Everything she had once valued, her husband, her stability, her love, was gone forever. She was haunted by the knowledge that her own actions had cost her everything she held dear, and there was no way to undo it.